the next headline becomes very, very important, because for some people it's going to be great news. For the ones who understand how the economy works, is, we're scratching our head, we're shaking our head, and we're saying, might as well. It's going to collapse either way. We're just waiting for the day that it does. This sound that I have for you is from Marca.com. And it says, is a fourth stimulus check a possibility? Will there be a fourth check? A group of Democratic senators sent out a petition requesting the president to budget for more money for direct stimulus payments. Quote, as you prepare your Build Back Better plan for long-term economic recovery, end quote, the senators wrote in a March letter to Biden, know that we are ready to work with you in support of recurring direct checks. This crisis is far from over, and families deserve certainty that they can put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. In their petition, the senators outline why unemployment insurance, despite its necessity, may not reach out far enough, as many still retain jobs with reduced hours. Some may have switched to lower paying jobs or temporarily left the workforce to care for family members during the pandemic. The senators lobby for the stimulus package and claim that the relief package, in combination with unemployment insurance, could keep 12 million people out of poverty, and adding another direct payment could keep an additional 6.3 million people above the poverty line. Quote, another one-time round of checks would provide a temporary lifeline, but when that money runs out, families will once again struggle to pay for basic necessities. The letter goes on to add, one more check is not enough during this public health and economic crisis. Again, this is really, really important, because how can these senators and politicians really justify that they want to get another stimulus? That is the reason why we have to make sure that we understand that this money printing one day is going to collapse the whole entire system. But at what point? When? We don't know. But we have a timeline. Somewhere between now and 7 years. And quite frankly, if they continue to spend as much as they're doing, as quickly as they're doing it, it might be in the next 2 years. It might be in the next year. Maybe several months. That is the reason why you have to make sure that you have a sense of urgency in your preparedness. The very first thing that you really have to take care of is food and water. Because if you do not have food and water in your pantry, then that is going to be the very first thing that you're going to be looking for. You're going to forget about paying your cell phone bill. You're going to forget about paying your power bill. You're going to forget about paying everything else. The very first two things that you're going to want is food and water. Because without those two, you die. You don't have to live with internet. You don't have to live with a cell phone. Those are luxuries that we have, but they're not necessary. I have a soundbite that I want to play for you, and it really shows you how important it is that we pay attention to all this money spending, because it's going to collapse the dollar. And this is from charismapodcast.net. Oh no, it's charismapodcastnetwork.com, excuse me. And the clip that I'm going to be playing for you is going to be Podcast Network. The title of it is Brace Yourself for the Most Dramatic Shift in Standard of Living in All U.S. History with Michael Snyder, Season 7, Episode 44. All right, and I want to play you about 2 minutes, 3 minutes of it, tops. Because Michael Snyder goes on there and he pretty much gives you the outline on how he believes the economic collapse is going to happen. What event is going to take place for the dollar to collapse? All right, and it's pretty much something that I've been saying on here. We're going to hear from someone else in another podcast. Here it is.
Well, Michael, we've just got a couple minutes left in the podcast, and I wanted you to address one of your stories is This Is How the U.S. Dollar Dies. I think it's a good way to end the show with a little bit of a discussion on your point in that story, another really good economic lesson. So why don't you tell that, Michael?
Yeah, because ultimately, today the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency of the world. Most Americans don't even realize that more dollars are used outside of the United States than are used inside the United States. And so the whole world uses the dollar to trade with one another, particularly with oil. All over the world, oil is traded in dollars. So much international trade happens in dollars. And this is a great benefit to us because this creates a tremendous demand for dollars, because everyone has to use dollars, everyone needs dollars, everyone's got to have dollars, and so this artificially increases the value of the dollar and increases our standard of living, because then we can import all sorts of stuff from all over the world for less expensively than we otherwise would. And of course, we're so reliant on goods from overseas. You go in the store, just about everything it seems is made somewhere else.
Right.
But what happens, and what's happening now, is that we're just being so reckless, and we're just wildly printing and borrowing and spending money, and what would dramatically increasing the money supply, and just being really, really reckless and very foolish. I've called it economic malpractice with our currency. And so the rest of the world is seeing this, and they're like, well, you know what, maybe and they're starting to think, and some countries like Russia and China and others are saying, you know what, it looks like we're going to need a new reserve currency, because this currency is not stable. They're creating it and printing it like crazy, and they're just being really reckless with it. It's not a good currency for the world to use anymore. So maybe we need to do something else. And so if the rest of the world moves away from that, all of a sudden we don't have all these other countries soaking up all of our extra dollars. We don't have all these other countries having a tremendous demand for our dollars. And so what that would mean is that all of a sudden demand for dollars drops, the value of the dollar relative to other global currency drops, and our standard of living goes way down as a result. So having the reserve currency of the world has been a massive advantage for us for decades. And if we lose that, it's game over. There's no going back to the good old
That's
days,
right.
and our standard of living, just evaporates. So it's people need to realize what a dangerous game we're playing. Unfortunately, the people in Washington aren't going to listen to people like me or people like you. Biden and the people running the Federal Reserve and the Congress, they're not going to listen to us. But they're going to do what they're going to do, and they have us on a path to not just economic disaster, but disaster for the country as a whole in a whole host of different ways. So it's not good, Dr. Green, and people need to buckle up. And it's just not economic we're facing, like we've talked about before, perfect storm. So many things are happening right now and are going to happen as events start to accelerate. So these are very, very troubled times, and it's going to get a whole lot worse.
So you really have to ask yourself, how in the world are they going to do with all the debt that they have? What are they going to do with it? There is one way to do it, and I'm going to let you hear it from Ron Paul. Here it is.
And it's funny, by the way, how now I'm hearing Republicans are angry at the Democrats because they're spending, but then it was the Democrats who were angry at the Republicans. As far as I can tell, both parties spend like drunken sailors. But let me ask you the question that a lot of people are worried about, including my kids. What we're leaving for them, and how big a mess will it be? Or is it, as some people would say, oh, no problem, we'll just continue this spending and it'll go on for 100 years?
Well, I think the big picture is you don't have to worry about those numbers. What you have to worry about is the political conditions. What are our liberties going to be like? Will we have privacy anymore? Will we have private property? Will we be rewarded for our incentives and hard work and savings? And that's not available to us because everybody has decided elsewhere that the real problem, like the debt, you say, well, you can't handle. How big is it? It's $23 trillion now as a global debt of $350 trillion, and it gets liquidated. And you've asked that question: how do you liquidate it? Where do you get rid of? How do you get rid of this debt? We're not going to work our way out of it. There's no way. From the people I know in Washington, they're not going to work hard and pay more taxes and find enough people in Congress to vote to reduce it. Yeah, did you know it, Rick, that not even the Republicans do that? The Republicans run the debt up like the rest. That's not going to happen. But the debt has to disappear. It will, and the market will take care of it. And it'll be some debt that people just will walk away from it. But governments don't walk away from it. They lose credibility. What will happen is the debt is liquidated through inflation.
All right, so if the only way to get rid of this debt is through inflation, how much inflation are we talking about? That is a question that I haven't really heard anyone else make. So I don't know. How much do they have to inflate to get rid of, $78 trillion? It has happened in the past. History has taught us, and I've actually reported on here, that some countries had quadrillions of dollars in their hyperinflation. Quadrillion. So if we have debt going that high, or we have hyperinflation going that high, gold and silver will pay for it. Because if you remember, I showed you here that in Germany, in the Weimar Republic, 1 ounce of gold was 87 trillion marks or dollars. 87 for 1 ounce. 2 ounces would pay out the debt. Or actually 1 would pay out the debt. Half an ounce would pay off the debt. So that's how crazy inflation can get. So if anything that I've said doesn't really persuade you, doesn't really show you that yes, we will have hyperinflation, the fact that we will have to service this debt through inflation should make up your mind on that. Because they will have to make sure that this inflation goes all the way to it goes all the way to $32 trillion or 45 trillion or 78 trillion, whichever trillion it is. They will have to make sure that it goes that high. Now, that is to service the U.S. government debt. Let me ask you this. How much would a piece of bread be in those days for you? Will you be able to afford it? Will you be able to feed your family? That's a real question you have to ask yourself. Because we're possibly anywhere between now to 7 years away from it. And just how much more we let this debt go on unchecked will only be how high the debt will, the hyperinflation will be, and the despair in every American family would be. That's why I said that 52%, or about 76 million Americans will have the worst shock of their life. The people on the lower rung of the social ladder, they're already used to not having anything. It's the middle class who won't be able to escape this. Are the ones who are going to be in shock, the ones who are going to be in despair more than everybody else. So that is why if you consider yourself to be middle class, lower middle class, and upper middle class, anywhere between that, you need to prepare. You have a very short amount of time before the American empire implodes. So what do you need to do? Very simple. You have to make sure that you pay off your debt, especially if you have money to pay off your house. Because if your property is paid off, you can sell it for a profit, especially in this market. And then if you live in the city or in the suburbs that only has a quarter acre or a tenth of an acre, move out from there. Go into the country where you can have at least 5 acres, but really anywhere between 5, 10, and above, depending on how much money you got and where you can find it, where you live, all throughout the country. And once you find your property, you have to make sure that it has surface water running through it all the time. But that is not the only thing that you want with it. You want to stock up water, bottles of water. You want to catch the rain. You want to have a well. These are the steps that you can take to make sure that you take care of your water needs. And then the next thing is that you get food. Remember, you need to have at least 2 years worth of food stocked up. The reason is because you want to make sure that you give yourself 2 growing seasons if you have crop failure. If you're not used to growing a garden, I can bet almost 100% that you will have, crop failure the very first year, maybe the second year. And let me tell you that trying to take care of those plants, consuming all that water, just for them not to give you anything, will be heartbreaking. And you're going to have a long time to go before the next growing season comes around. And then try again, possibly just to fail again. So that is the reason why it's important for you to grow your garden right now, for you to have constant practice and know how to grow anything right now while you're able to go to the store and buy groceries without, worrying about what you couldn't grow at home. Right now is your opportunity to do that. Because once everything is hyperinflated, everything's going to fly off the shelf, and it's going to be very difficult for it to be replenished. And if it happens like Venezuela, where the government sends a care package, once every 3 weeks with only a day's worth of food, anytime between that, you're going to have to take care of yourself. And if you live in a populated area with so many hungry people, they're going to overrun your house. Even if you do have weapons, because guess what? They will have them too. All right? If the Biden administration is successful in taking away the guns and banning assault rifles, quote unquote, if they are able to ban AR-15s and anything like it, it's going to be more difficult for you to defend your property from people from overrunning it, especially if you live in the suburbs. If you have anything less than those 5 or 10 acres, it's going to be very difficult for you to protect your land. All right? If people can pretty much throw a rock at your window and break it because you're so close to the road, you got to move. So please take care of that.
The Man-Made Survival Show.